If you're just beginning your studies and proofs, you've definitely ran into the question of proving that the square root of 2 is irrational. And I'm sure your professor has gone through a huge, not really huge, but just gone through like this fairly confusing process, and which at first doesn't seem to have any relation to the square root of 2 and it being irrational. But today I hopefully wanted to provide some thinking on the matter with a layman's form of this question, which is to prove that Asian parents equal irrational. Okay, so how are we going to start this? We're first going to assume that an argument is rational, which is going to be d over y, where d is equal to dumb and y is equal to u. And we're also going to state that d over y is in possibility. All right, let's change this to is a possibility. So from here, we then can just flip this equation to u plus an argument equals dumb. Okay, so the next thing we have to do is we have to establish that u of 0 exists. So since u is a possibility, there must exist a y of 0, which is the smallest that your self-esteem could possibly get. And then from here, we just have to set up an equation, which is going to be u switching to art is equal to your self-esteem times, or the self-esteem of 0, sorry. So the smallest your self-esteem can get multiplied by an argument minus this new variable, g, which g equals no girlfriend. Okay, so then we just have to expand this. So your smallest self-esteem multiplied by the argument minus the smallest self-esteem multiplied by the fact you don't have a girlfriend. So what does this tell us? Well, we already said that the lowest your self-esteem could get was 0. This is, in the form of this was supposed to be the lowest. However, we've now deduced that art of 0 is in possibility. And how do we know this? Well, since y of 0 is a possibility, that we therefore, this means implies that g is a possibility. But we already said that y of 0 was the lowest your self-esteem could get. Now we have figured out that art of 0 is in possibility because both of these are in possibility. So from deducing this, we can plug this into here that art of 0 is somehow less than the already established self-esteem of 0, which is an impossibility, since y of 0 was supposed to be the lowest it could go, yet we found something lower. Now let's apply this to the let's apply this to the proof of this square root of 2 being irrational, and I can show you how this ties in. So assume square root of 2 is rational. So we first have to deduce that 2 is equal to some variable, m over n, where m over n is a positive integer. So then we just then flip the equation. So n square root of 2 equals m. And then we have to also deduce that since n is a positive integer, there exists n0, which is the smallest possible positive integer. And then from here, we just have to, again, set up the equation we set up, which was that, let's say b of 0 is equivalent to n of 0 times the square root of 2 minus 1. Now then, if we expand this again, we have n of 0, which is the smallest possible integer, minus, again, the smallest possible integer, which, since both of these are integers, and this is rational, this means that this exists and is smaller. So this means that b of 0 is smaller than n of 0, but we already said that n of 0 was the smallest possible. So number line form, this means that basically deduces this, which is impossible. So by contradiction, square root of 2 is irrational. So hopefully you can begin to understand a little bit more on how this argument works. And if you're unfamiliar with contradictions, it's basically just finding a fallacy in an assertion that you made, which we claim that square root of 2 is rational. However, by just finding a fallacy that you may not even consider to be in the same realm as square root of 2 to be, to exist, we can then deduce that square root of 2 is in fact irrational.